Captain Elena Voss pushed through the glass doors of the community center, her boots clicking against polished linoleum with the measured cadence of someone who had walked countless flight lines. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her face, highlighting the exhaustion that had become her constant companion since the funeral 3 weeks ago. She paused in the doorway of Conference Room B, taking in the circle of mismatched chairs where 8 people sat nursing paper cups of coffee. Dr. Patricia Reeves looked up from her clipboard with a practiced smile of someone who had guided too many broken souls through their darkest hours. "Welcome. You must be Elena. Please, take any seat you'd like. We were just sharing what brought us here tonight." Elena chose a chair near the back, her eyes automatically scanning the room with the tactical awareness that never truly left. Staff Sergeant Marcus Henley dominated the space across from her, his broad shoulders filling out a Marine Corps t-shirt that had seen better days. His weathered hands gestured emphatically as he continued his story about convoy operations in Kandahar, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. And that's when the IED went off, Henley was saying, his gaze sweeping the circle to ensure everyone was appropriately impressed. "Lost 2 good men that day. But civilians back home, they just don't understand what real combat is like. The sacrifices we make." Elena's fingers tightened around her coffee cup as Henley's eyes settled on her with obvious assessment. She recognized that look, the same one she had seen countless times when people tried to place her in neat categories that made sense to them. Young woman at a veterans meeting meant only one thing in their minds. "So, Elena," Dr. Reeves said gently, "what brings you to our group tonight?" Elena felt the weight of 8 pairs of eyes settling on her, like targeting systems acquiring a lock. "My husband died last month," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the pain that still felt like shrapnel in her chest. "Car accident stateside. I thought maybe talking to other people who understand military life might help." Henley nodded with the patronizing sympathy reserved for military widows. "Tough break, sweetheart. Losing a service member husband is hard on you dependents. But don't worry, we take care of our own here. You'll learn a lot just listening to those of us who've actually been downrange." The words hit Elena like a slap, but she kept her expression neutral. Years of maintaining composure under pressure served her well as Corporal Jake Morrison chimed in with his own brand of misguided kindness. "Yeah, it's good that you're reaching out," Morrison said, his young face earnest with the need to be helpful. "Military life is complicated for spouses. All those deployments, the uncertainty. Must have been scary not knowing what your husband was going through over there." Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She could feel Technical Sergeant Rosa Chun studying her from across the circle, something analytical in the medic's dark eyes that suggested she saw more than the others. But Chun remained silent as the conversation continued around Elena, the group members sharing their experiences with the casual assumption that she would never truly understand their world. The community center's air conditioning hummed overhead, mixing with the distant sound of traffic from the base nearby. Through the windows, Elena could see the amber glow of runway lights in the distance, and for a moment she felt the familiar pull of the sky calling to her like a siren's song she could no longer answer. The group settled into a rhythm over the next hour, with each member sharing their struggles while Elena listened from her position near the back. Henley dominated most conversations, his voice booming across the circle as he dispensed wisdom about military life with the confidence of someone who had never been questioned. "You see, Elena," Henley said, turning his attention back to her like a lecturer addressing a particularly slow student, "the thing about combat operations is that split-second decisions mean life or death. Your husband probably never told you the real details because he was protecting you from that reality. We learned to compartmentalize, keep the ugly stuff away from our families." Elena nodded politely, her fingers drumming a silent pattern against her thigh that matched the rhythm of rotor blades she had heard countless times during close air support missions. Dr. Reeves noticed the gesture and made a note on her clipboard, but said nothing. Morrison leaned forward in his chair, eager to contribute. "I remember my first deployment. the kid said, his voice gaining confidence. Green as grass. Didn't know an RPG from an IED. But you learn fast when your life depends on it. No offense, Elena, but it's just different for people who've actually been in the sandbox. The condescension in his tone made Elena's hands clench briefly before she forced them to relax. She had heard variations of this conversation before, usually from ground troops who assumed that anyone flying above 30,000 feet was somehow disconnected from the realities of combat. They never understood that close air support meant flying low and slow, close enough to see the faces of the people you were trying to save. Technical Sergeant Chun finally spoke up, her voice cutting through Morrison's rambling. Some of us process trauma differently, she said, glancing meaningfully at Elena. Not everyone needs to broadcast their service to validate their experience. Henley waved dismissively. Come on, Rosa. Look at her. Sweet little thing probably never even set foot on a military installation except for family day events. Nothing wrong with that, but let's not pretend she understands what we've been through. Elena felt something cold and familiar settle in her stomach, the same feeling she had experienced before every combat mission. The room seemed to sharpen around her, details becoming hyper-aware as her training kicked in automatically. She noticed Chen's tactical watch, Morrison's nervous habit of checking exits, the way Dr. Reeves positioned herself to maintain visual contact with everyone in the circle. What branch was your husband in, Elena? Dr. Reeves asked gently, trying to redirect the conversation away from the growing tension. Air Force, Elena replied simply, not trusting herself to say more without revealing information she was not ready to share. Henley snorted softly. Chair Force, he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Probably some desk jockey at the Pentagon, pushing papers and pretending it was dangerous work. The comment hung in the air like smoke from an explosion, and Elena felt her military bearing assert itself despite her efforts to remain invisible. Her spine straightened imperceptibly, her chin lifted a fraction, and for just a moment the exhausted widow facade slipped enough to reveal something harder underneath. Morrison caught the change and frowned slightly, confusion flickering across his young features. But before he could process what he had seen, the moment passed, and Elena was just another grieving spouse again, small and quiet in her chair at the back of the circle. Through the windows, the distant rumble of aircraft engines carried across the night air, and Elena's eyes tracked automatically toward the sound. Her fingers twitched with muscle memory, hands that had gripped countless control sticks and throttles, that had guided tons of titanium and ordnance through hostile skies at altitudes that would make these ground pounders sick with terror. But she said nothing, just sipped her coffee and let them continue their assumptions while the weight of her silence grew heavier with each passing minute. Dr. Reeves attempted to steer the conversation toward healthier territory, but Henley seemed determined to establish his dominance over the group's newest member. He shifted in his chair, his bulk commanding attention as he prepared to deliver what he clearly considered sage advice. Elena, let me give you some perspective here, Henley said, his tone taking on the patronizing quality of someone explaining basic concepts to a child. Military widows go through stages. First there's denial, thinking you understood what your husband did. Then anger when you realize how much he kept from you. It's natural to feel left out of that world. Elena's coffee had grown cold in her hands, but she continued to hold the cup as a focal point, something to keep her grounded while her mind automatically calculated wind speed and direction based on the gentle movement of tree branches visible through the windows. Old habits died hard, especially when they had kept her alive through 47 combat missions. The thing is, sweetheart, Henley continued, completely oblivious to the way Elena's knuckles had gone wide around her cup, you're trying to connect with something you were never really part of. Your husband's unit, his deployments, his combat experience. That's a brotherhood you can't understand because you weren't there when rounds were flying. Morrison nodded enthusiastically, eager to support his apparent mentor. Exactly right, Sarge. I mean, no disrespect, Elena, but when you're taking incoming fire and calling for air support, you develop bonds that civilians just can't comprehend. It changes you at a cellular level. The irony of Morrison's words hit Elena like a physical blow. She had been the air support he was talking about, had answered those desperate calls more times than she could count. She had heard the panic in ground controllers' voices as they painted targets and called for immediate close air support, had dropped ordnance danger close to save the lives of people just like Morrison. Chen was watching Elena carefully now, her medic's instincts picking up on subtle changes in posture and breathing that the others missed entirely. Rosa, Elena noticed, had stopped participating in the conversation and was instead studying her with the analytical intensity of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. "You know what I think would help you, Elena?" Henley said, leaning forward with the earnest concern of someone convinced of his own wisdom. "You should focus on connecting with other military spouses. There are great support groups for dependents dealing with loss. This group is really more for those of us who've actually served." The dismissal was so casual, so matter-of-fact, that it took Elena's breath away. She had buried friends, had flown through flak thick enough to walk on, had landed aircraft with battle damage that should have killed her. She had earned a Distinguished Flying Cross and 2 air medals, had been personally commended by a 3-star general for actions that save an entire company of Marines. And this man was suggesting she find a spouse support group. Dr. Reeves cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Marcus, I think everyone who's been touched by military service deserves support, regardless of their specific role or relationship to." "With respect, Doc," Henley interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having the final word. "There's a difference between being affected by military service and actually living it. Elena seems like a nice woman, but she's processing grief, not combat trauma. Different animals entirely." Elena set her coffee cup down with deliberate care, the small ceramic sound echoing in the suddenly quiet room. For a moment, something dangerous flickered behind her eyes, something that would have been immediately recognizable to anyone who had ever seen a predator assess its prey. But she caught herself, forced her expression back to neutral, and simply nodded as if accepting his judgment. Outside, the sound of jet engines grew closer, and Elena's head turned automatically toward the window. Her body language shifted almost imperceptibly, shoulders squaring as if she were unconsciously preparing for a briefing. The change lasted only seconds before she caught herself and slumped back into the pose of a grieving widow, but Chun had seen it. The meeting dragged on for another 20 minutes, with Henley holding court while the others shared their experiences with varying degrees of authenticity. Elena noticed how Morrison embellished his stories slightly each time he told them, how Henley's voice took on a different cadence when he described actions that sounded suspiciously like scenes from war movies rather than actual combat. As a combat medic, Chun finally said, breaking her long silence, "I learned that assumptions can be deadly. Sometimes the quietest person in the room has seen the most action." Her words carried a weight that made everyone pause, but Henley quickly dismissed the implied challenge with a wave of his hand. "Sure, Rosa, but let's be realistic here. Elena's probably never even heard live gunfire, except maybe at a 4th of July celebration. There's no shame in that, but we shouldn't pretend otherwise." Elena's training kicked in automatically as she assessed the room's occupants with fresh eyes. Morrison showed classic signs of someone whose deployment experience was limited but real. His nervous energy and need to prove himself suggested brief exposure to actual danger. Chun carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had genuinely saved lives under fire. Her hands were steady, her voice controlled, her observations sharp. But Henley was different. Despite his bluster and commanding presence, Elena noticed inconsistencies in his stories. Details that didn't quite match standard Marine Corps procedures, tactical knowledge that seemed more theoretical than practical. He was either embellishing heavily or outright fabricating portions of his service record. The irony was crushing. The man who was most dismissive of her supposed lack of military experience might have the least authentic credentials of anyone in the room. Dr. Reeves attempted to guide the conversation toward therapeutic goals, asking each member to share one positive coping mechanism they had developed. When the focus turned to Elena, She spoke carefully about the importance of maintaining routines and staying physically active. "What kind of exercise do you do?" Morrison asked, apparently trying to be supportive despite his earlier dismissiveness. "Yoga? Pilates? Something peaceful, I bet." Elena almost smiled at the assumption. "I run," she said simply, not mentioning that her running routes were timed and mapped like training missions, or that she maintained the same physical fitness standards she had held as an active-duty pilot. "Good for you," Henley said approvingly. "Nice, peaceful activity. None of that aggressive stuff like the combatives training we had to do. You probably couldn't handle that kind of intensity anyway." The casual dismissal hit Elena harder than she expected. She had qualified expert marksman with 3 different weapon systems, had completed survival training that broke stronger people than Morrison, had maintained her composure while flying through S-aim-filled skies that would have reduced Henley to a screaming wreck. Chun was studying Elena's reaction carefully, her dark eyes missing nothing. "Tell me, Elena," she said quietly, "what did your husband fly?" The question caught everyone by surprise, including Elena. She hesitated for just a moment before answering. "C-130S," she said, choosing a transport aircraft that sounded safe and non-threatening. "Transport pilot," Henley said with obvious relief, as if this confirmation validated all his assumptions. "Makes perfect sense. Probably flew supply runs between safe bases. Important work, but not exactly combat flying." Elena's hands clenched involuntarily at the dismissal of transport pilots, many of whom faced significant dangers getting supplies to forward operating bases. But what stung more was the casual way Henley dismissed an entire category of military service as somehow less worthy of respect. Chin was still watching Elena intently, and something in her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by Elena's answer. The medic's tactical awareness was clearly more developed than the others, and Elena realized she might have underestimated at least one person in this room. Outside, the sound of aircraft had grown more frequent, and Elena found herself automatically identifying engine types and flight patterns despite her efforts to remain focused on the group discussion. Old habits died hard, especially ones that had kept her alive in some of the most dangerous airspace in the world. The meeting was winding down when Elena's phone buzzed against her leg. She glanced at the screen and felt her blood freeze. Emergency alert from the base notification system, the kind that went out to all personnel regardless of active status. Convoy under heavy fire, requesting immediate air support, grid coordinates that put the action less than 15 miles from their current location. Elena's training kicked in automatically as she processed the tactical information scrolling across her phone. Multiple vehicles disabled, casualties mounting, enemy forces in fortified positions with clear fields of fire. The convoy was trapped in a kill zone with limited options for extraction. "Everything all right?" Dr. Reeves asked, noticing Elena's sudden tension. "Just a news alert," Elena said, her voice carefully neutral even as her mind began calculating response times and attack vectors. She could hear the distant rumble of aircraft engines changing pitch and direction, vectoring toward the emergency coordinates with the urgency that meant lives hung in the balance. Henley's phone buzzed a moment later, followed by Morrison's. Both men checked their alerts with the casual interest of people reading sports scores, completely missing the tactical significance of what they were seeing. "Looks like there's some kind of training exercise going on," Morrison said, glancing at his screen. "Convoy got ambushed or something. Probably just war games." Elena bit back her immediate response. The grid coordinates were real. The casualty reports were coded in a way that indicated actual wounded, not training scenarios. But explaining how she knew the difference would require revealing knowledge that didn't fit her cover story. Chen's phone remained silent, but Elena noticed the medic watching her carefully. Rosa had seen Elena's reaction to the alert, had observed the way her posture shifted from civilian casualness to something harder and more focused. The medic's expression suggested she was beginning to piece together a puzzle that didn't match the picture Elena had presented. "Poor guys," Henley said with casual sympathy, still staring at his phone. "Probably some National Guard unit playing soldier. Real combat is nothing like their little exercises." When you're actually taking fire, everything changes. The noise, the confusion, the smell of cordite. Elena's jaw tightened as she listened to Henley pontificate about combat, while actual soldiers were dying less than 20 miles away. Through the windows, she could see aircraft lights moving with purpose across the night sky, vectoring toward coordinates that she had memorized automatically upon reading the alert. Her phone buzzed again with updated casualty reports. 3 Kia, 7 wounded, enemy forces in reinforced positions with heavy weapons. Request immediate close air support. Danger close authorization granted. Elena felt her hands trembling slightly as she read details that painted a picture of desperate soldiers fighting for their lives. Morrison was still treating the situation like entertainment. "Wonder what kind of aircraft they're using for the exercise," he said, craning his neck to look out the windows. "Probably some old A-10s. Those things are ancient, but I guess they work okay for training missions." Elena's vision went white-hot for a moment. A-10s ancient. The most effective close air support platform ever built. Aircraft that had saved more ground troops than any other weapon system in the military arsenal. Dismissed by someone whose entire combat experience probably consisted of a single deployment driving supply trucks between secure bases. The distant sound of Gu-8 cannon fire reached them through the open windows, 30mm rounds being delivered with surgical precision at coordinates Elena could visualize with crystal clarity. Someone was dying out there. Someone was making split-second, life-and-death decisions while flying at altitudes and speeds that would terrify these armchair warriors. Chen suddenly stood up, her medic instincts overriding social protocols. "I need to go," she said simply, gathering her things with efficient movements. "That's not a training exercise." Her words hung in the air like an accusation, and Elena felt something shift in the room's dynamic. Chen knew something was wrong, had recognized the signs that the others had missed entirely. The medic's eyes met Elena's for a brief moment, and Elena saw understanding beginning to dawn in those dark features. Chen paused at the door, her hand on the handle as she turned back to face the group. "Rosa, what are you talking about?" Dr. Reeves asked, concern evident in her voice. "It's just a training notification." "That's not training grid," Chen said flatly, her combat medic experience cutting through the civilian assumptions like a blade. "Those coordinates are live fire zone. Real casualties." Elena's phone buzzed again with another update that made her stomach clench. Convoy pinned down, unable to advance or retreat. Enemy mortars zeroing in on their position. Close air support inbound, but ETA still 8 minutes. In combat time, 8 minutes might as well be 8 hours. Henley waved dismissively at Chen's assessment. "Come on, Rosa. You're being paranoid. They wouldn't run live fire exercises this close to civilian population centers. It's obviously a training scenario." Elena watched Chen's face harden with frustration. The medic knew what she was seeing, understood the tactical reality that Henley was too inexperienced or too stubborn to recognize. Rosa looked directly at Elena, with an expression that seemed to say she suspected Elena understood as well. The sound of rotorcraft passed overhead, heavy transport helicopters moving fast toward the emergency coordinates. Elena's trained ear automatically identified them as medevac birds, the distinctive whop-hop-hop of Blackhawks configured for casualty evacuation. No training exercise required that level of medical preparation. Morrison looked up from his phone with confusion. "It says here they're requesting immediate dust-off for multiple casualties. That seems pretty realistic for a war game." "Because it's not a game," Chen said sharply, her patience finally exhausted. "Those are real soldiers getting shot at right now. Real people bleeding out while we sit here debating whether it's training." Elena felt her carefully constructed facade beginning to crack under the pressure of listening to actual combat reports while these people treated it like television drama. Her hands had unconsciously shifted into the position they took when gripping an A-10's control stick, muscle memory asserting itself despite her efforts to remain invisible. Dr. Reeves tried to maintain her professional composure. "Even if it is a real situation, There's nothing we can do about it from here. Perhaps we should. Elena's phone exploded with priority alerts. Convoy commander down. Second in command wounded. Enemy forces advancing on disabled vehicles. Request immediate air support. Any available aircraft. Authorization for danger close strikes. GPS coordinates that Elena had memorized burned behind her eyes like targeting data. She could see it all in her mind with perfect clarity. Soldiers huddled behind damaged vehicles, while enemy fire poured down from elevated positions. Wounded men crying for medics, while their brothers returned fire with whatever ammunition they had left. The smell of cordite and diesel fuel and blood mixing in the desert air. And somewhere above them, A-10 pilots were pushing their aircraft to the limits, diving in a hostile fire to deliver the precise ordnance that would break the enemy attack and save American lives. Pilots who understood that every second of delay meant another soldier might not make it home. Henley was still pontificating about training procedures when Elena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. The sound cut through his lecture like a gunshot, drawing every eye in the room to her suddenly rigid posture. "Those coordinates are 12 miles southwest of here," Elena said quietly, her voice carrying a precision that hadn't been there before. "Enemy contact at grid, November Whiskey 7742. Multiple casualties confirmed, not simulated." The room went dead silent. Elena realized she had just quoted military grid coordinates from memory and used tactical terminology that no civilian spouse should have known. Chen was staring at her with dawning comprehension, while Henley's face showed complete confusion. "How do you know that?" Morrison asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena felt the weight of their stares like targeting lasers painting her position. There was no going back now. No way to explain away the knowledge that had just spilled from her lips with the automatic precision of someone who had spent years reading tactical reports and coordinating with ground forces under fire. Elena stood frozen in the center of the circle, her carefully constructed cover story crumbling around her like a damaged aircraft losing altitude. The silence stretched between them until Chun took a step forward, her medic's instincts overriding social protocol. "Elena," Rosa said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of growing certainty. "How do you know those grid coordinates?" Elena's training warred with her grief, years of operational security protocols clashing with the desperate need to do something while soldiers died 12 miles away. Her phone continued buzzing with updates that painted an increasingly desperate picture. Enemy mortars finding their range, ammunition running low, medevac birds unable to land under heavy fire. "I used to help my husband with his paperwork," Elena said weakly, the lies sounding hollow even to her own ears. "Sometimes he would practice grid reading at home." Henley snorted with derision, his earlier patronizing tone replaced by suspicious hostility. "Nobody memorizes random coordinates from paperwork, sweetheart. And transport pilots don't work with tactical grids like that." Elena felt her military bearing asserting itself despite every effort to remain invisible. Her shoulders squared automatically, her chin lifted with the unconscious pride of someone who had earned her place in one of the most exclusive communities in military aviation. For just a moment, the exhausted widow facade slipped completely away. Chun saw the transformation and took another step closer. "Elena," she said carefully, "what did you actually do in the Air Force?" The question hung in the air like ordnance waiting to detonate. Elena could feel Morrison's confusion, Dr. Reeves' growing concern, Henley's mounting anger at being deceived. But above all, she could hear the distant rumble of aircraft engines and the faint crackle of radio chatter from emergency responders vectoring toward coordinates she knew by heart. Soldiers were dying while she stood in a circle of plastic chairs, pretending to be someone she wasn't. Another alert blazed across her phone screen, and this time Elena couldn't suppress her reaction. Her breath caught as she read casualty figures that were climbing by the minute. 5 Kia now, 12 wounded, convoy commander requesting immediate extraction but unable to move under enemy fire. Elena's hands trembled as tactical knowledge flooded her consciousness unbidden. She could see the terrain around those coordinates, knew the approaches and elevation changes that would give attacking aircraft the best angles. She understood the weapon systems required to break up fortified enemy positions without endangering friendly forces. Chun moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Elena, those men need help. If you know something that could save lives, now is the time to speak up." Elena looked up from her phone to find 8 pairs of eyes fixed on her with varying degrees of suspicion, concern, and growing realization. Henley's face showed anger at being lied to, but underneath his bluster, she could see fear. Morrison looked confused and slightly betrayed. Dr. Reeves appeared professionally concerned about the group dynamic she no longer understood. But Chin's expression held something different. Understanding, respect, and an urgent need that transcended their artificial social roles. "My husband didn't fly C-130S," Elena said quietly, the words falling like bombs in the sudden silence. "He flew F-16S out of Shaw, and I didn't just help with his paperwork." The admission hung between them like a confession, and Elena felt years of careful civilian camouflage dissolving under the weight of military necessity. Through the windows, she could see more aircraft lights converging on the emergency coordinates, but she knew from the tactical reports that they might not be enough. Henley's face went pale as the implications of her words began to sink in. Morrison's mouth fell open in shock. Dr. Reeves looked completely lost, trying to process information that didn't fit any framework she understood. But Chun nodded slowly, as if Elena had just confirmed something she had suspected all along. "What did you fly, Elena?" Chun asked, her voice carrying the respect of one combat veteran addressing another. Elena's phone erupted with another priority alert that made her heart stop. "Convoy overrun. Enemy forces advancing on wounded. Immediate air support critical. ETA for rescue birds now 15 minutes, but ground forces might not last 5. She looked up to find Chun still waiting for her answer, the medic's dark eyes holding a mixture of respect and urgent necessity that cut through Elena's carefully maintained defenses like a laser-guided munition. "A-10 Thunderbolt II," Elena said quietly, the words falling like precision ordnance in the sudden silence. 47 combat missions over 2 deployments. Call sign Viper 1. The confession hit the room like a shockwave. Morrison's face went white as he processed what she had just revealed. Henley's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his earlier bravado evaporating like smoke. Dr. Reeves looked completely overwhelmed, trying to reconcile the quiet widow with the combat pilot who had just emerged from Elena's carefully constructed facade. But Chun nodded with the grim satisfaction of someone whose instincts had been proven correct. "I knew it," she said simply. "Nobody moves like that without serious flight training." Elena's military bearing fully asserted itself now that her cover was blown. Her posture straightened with unconscious pride, shoulders squaring as years of hiding her true identity finally fell away. She was no longer playing the role of grieving dependent. She was Captain Elena Voss, and soldiers were dying 12 miles away. "Viper 1, Morrison whispered, his voice filled with awe and terror. "Holy shit, Elena. That's you. The pilot who saved Bravo Company at Kandahar. That gun run through the canyon when the whole platoon was pinned down." Elena's tactical mind was already working the problem, processing terrain data and enemy positions from the grid coordinates burning in her memory. The convoy was trapped in a natural kill zone, elevated enemy positions providing overlapping fields of fire, while American forces huddled behind disabled vehicles with nowhere to run. Chun moved closer, her combat medic instincts recognizing the shift in Elena's demeanor. "Can you help them?" Rosa asked urgently. "Those coordinates you mentioned, can you do something?" Elena's hands were already moving, muscle memory taking over as she accessed tactical networks through her phone with credentials that should have been deactivated but somehow remained active. Emergency protocols kicked in, systems recognizing her call sign and granting access to real-time battlefield data. The situation was worse than she had feared. 7 vehicles disabled, 13 casualties including the convoy commander, enemy mortars walking their fire closer to American positions with each salvo. Close air support was inbound but still 10 minutes out, too long for soldiers bleeding out under concentrated enemy fire. Henley finally found his voice, anger and disbelief warring in his expression. "You lied to us," he said accusingly. "Sat there and let us think you were just some dependent who didn't understand military life." Elena turned on him with the cold precision of someone who had stared death in the face and emerged victorious. "I sat there and listened to you pontificate about combat experience while dismissing the very aircraft and missions that have saved more American lives than your entire service record," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under pressure. Morrison was still staring at her in shock. But the stories about Viper 1, about the pilot who could put 30mm rounds through a window at 400 knots. That was you. That was actually you. Elena's phone buzzed with another tactical update. Ground commander requesting immediate danger close air support. Authorization granted for strikes within 50 meters of friendly forces. The kind of precision flying that required nerves of steel and skills that took years to develop. And somewhere in the night sky, A-10 pilots were pushing their aircraft toward those coordinates, ready to risk everything to save American soldiers. But Elena knew the terrain, understood the tactical situation better than pilots who were seeing it for the first time. Elena's fingers moved across her phone with the practiced efficiency of someone who had coordinated air strikes under the most demanding circumstances. Her military credentials still held emergency access to tactical networks, an oversight that now meant the difference between life and death for American soldiers. The battlefield data painted a clear picture in her mind. Enemy forces had established interlocking fields of fire from elevated positions, creating a perfect kill zone around the disabled convoy. Standard approach vectors would expose attacking aircraft to concentrated anti-aircraft fire, but Elena could see an alternative route that would use terrain masking to achieve tactical surprise. Chen watched Elena's transformation with professional fascination. The grieving widow had completely disappeared, replaced by a combat veteran whose every movement spoke of deadly competence and absolute focus. "Rosa," Elena said without looking up from her tactical display, "I need you to contact base operations immediately. Tell them Viper 1 has eyes on the situation and requests immediate patch-through to inbound CAS flights." "But you're not active duty anymore," Morrison protested, his voice still shaky from the revelation of Elena's true identity. "You can't just take command of combat mission." Elena looked up from her phone with eyes that had seen more combat than Morrison could imagine. "Watch me," she said with quiet authority that brooked no argument. Dr. Reeves stepped forward, her civilian mindset struggling to process what was happening in her therapy group. "Elena, I don't understand what's going on, but surely there are proper channels for this kind of thing. You can't just... People are dying." Elena cut her off, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had made similar decisions 47 times before. "Proper channels take time we don't have. Those soldiers have maybe 5 minutes before enemy mortars find their range." Elena's phone connected to the tactical network with a priority override that should have been impossible for retired personnel. But emergency protocols recognized her call sign and granted access with the understanding that extreme circumstances sometimes required extraordinary measures. "Viper 1 to any station. This is emergency tactical override." She spoke into her phone with the crisp precision of combat communications. "I have real-time battlefield intelligence on grid, November Whiskey 7742. Request immediate patch to inbound CAS flights." The response came back within seconds, crackling through her phone speaker with the urgency of combat operations. "Viper 1, this is Overlord Control. Confirm your status and current position." Elena's training took over completely, years of combat experience flowing through her voice like electricity through copper wire. "Overlord Control, Viper 1 is currently civilian status but maintains tactical certification and emergency access. I have detailed terrain knowledge and tactical assessment for immediate CAS mission. Henley was staring at her with a mixture of awe and terror, finally understanding that he was witnessing something far beyond his experience or comprehension. This was what real combat leadership looked like, decisions made with split-second timing while American lives hung in the balance. Chen moved to Elena's side, her combat medic instincts recognizing the critical nature of what was unfolding. "What do you need from us?" Rosa asked quietly. Elena was already pulling up detailed terrain maps on her phone, her tactical mind processing approach vectors and target priorities with the automatic efficiency of someone who had done this under fire countless times before. "I need you to clear this room except for essential personnel," she said without looking up. This is about to become a combat operations center. Morrison stood frozen in place, unable to process the transformation of the quiet woman he had dismissed as a clueless dependent into someone coordinating active combat operations with casual authority that spoke of genuine expertise. Elena's phone buzzed with incoming traffic from the tactical network, pilots requesting immediate guidance from someone who understood the terrain and enemy positions better than anyone currently airborne. "Viper 1, this is Ghost 27 inbound from the northeast. We have visual on target area, but need tactical assessment for optimal approach vector." Elena's voice took on the calm professionalism that had guided dozens of pilots through similar situations. "Ghost 27, Viper 1 has detailed terrain analysis. Enemy positions concentrated on ridgeline at bearing 0 degrees from convoy position. Recommend approach from canyon to the southwest. Terrain masking available until final attack run." Elena's phone exploded with incoming tactical traffic as multiple aircraft converged on the emergency coordinates. Her training kicked into overdrive, processing battlefield data with the automatic efficiency of someone who had coordinated similar missions under the most demanding circumstances imaginable. "Ghost 27, maintain current heading until you reach checkpoint Alpha. Then execute hard left turn to bearing to Savenzero." Elena transmitted with the calm authority of someone who had talked pilots through worse situations. Enemy anti-aircraft concentrated on eastern approaches. "Your best vector is through Devil's Canyon. Terrain masking until final attack run." "Copy, Viper 1, came the immediate response. "Ghost 27 executing southwest approach per your guidance." "What's our target priority?" Elena was already analyzing enemy positions through real-time intelligence feeds, her tactical mind automatically prioritizing threats based on 47 missions of hard-earned experience. Primary targets are mortar positions on ridgeline bearing 0 degrees from convoy location. Secondary targets are machine gun nests providing overlapping fire. Danger close authorization granted. Friendlies marked with infrared strobes. The community center had transformed into something resembling a combat operations center, with Elena at its heart coordinating multiple aircraft while American soldiers fought for their lives 12 miles away. Chun stood at her shoulder, ready to assist with whatever Elena needed. Morrison and Henley watched in stunned silence, finally understanding they were witnessing expertise at a level they had never imagined. Dr. Reeves had retreated to the far side of the room, completely overwhelmed by the transformation of her quiet therapy group into something that belonged in a war zone. She clutched her clipboard with white knuckles, trying to process how a grieving widow had become the tactical coordinator for an active combat mission. "Viper 1, this is Reaper 4-1, came another voice through Elena's phone. "We have Hellfire missiles locked on target, but need terminal guidance for precision strike. Can you provide laser designation?" Elena's mind automatically calculated the tactical requirements, understanding immediately what the pilot needed and why conventional targeting systems weren't sufficient for this mission. "Reaper 4-1, I'm not equipped for laser designation from this position, but I can provide precise grid coordinates for G-piece-guided munitions. Enemy mortar position confirmed at November Whiskey 7743 Alpha." The radio chatter continued as Elena orchestrated a complex air operation with multiple aircraft types, each requiring different tactical coordination and target assignment. Her voice never wavered, her commands precise and authoritative, guided by experience that had been earned in some of the most dangerous airspace in the world. Henley finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Jesus Christ, Elena. You're actually running the whole operation." Elena glanced at him briefly, her expression holding none of the uncertainty or grief that had characterized her earlier demeanor. "This is what I did, Marcus," she said simply before returning her attention to the tactical displays. "This is who I am. Ghost 27, you're approaching final attack run. Confirm visual on infrared markers for friendly positions." Elena transmitted, her voice carrying the weight of responsibility for both the attacking pilots and the soldiers on the ground. "Target is heavy weapons position 200 meters northwest of convoy location. Visual confirmed, Viper 1. Friendlies marked, target acquired. Beginning attack, run now." Elena held her breath as she listened to the pilot execute the attack she had coordinated, understanding that success or failure would be measured in American lives saved or lost. Through her phone speaker, she could hear the distinctive sound of GU-8 cannon fire as A-10s delivered precision ordnance exactly where she had directed them. Direct hit on mortar position came the confirmation. Secondary explosions indicate ammunition cook-off. Enemy fire on convoy has ceased from that vector. Elena allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before immediately refocusing on the remaining threats. The tactical situation was improving, but soldiers were still pinned down and wounded men needed immediate evacuation. Her job wasn't finished until every American was safely extracted from that kill zone. Chun watched Elena coordinate the mission with professional admiration that bordered on awe. This was combat leadership at its highest level, life-and-death decisions made with split-second timing while maintaining absolute composure under pressure that would break most people. The tactical situation continued to evolve as Elena coordinated the complex air operation with the precision that had made her legendary among ground forces. Her phone crackled with updates from multiple aircraft as they systematically eliminated enemy positions under her guidance. "Viper 1, this is Dustoff 72, came a new voice through the tactical network. "We're inbound for casualty evacuation, but still taking sporadic fire from eastern approaches. Can you clear our landing zone?" Elena was already analyzing the remaining threats, her tactical mind processing enemy positions and friendly locations with automatic efficiency. "Dustoff 72, be advised enemy sniper teams still active on ridgeline bearing 045 degrees from landing zone. Recommending approach from western vector. Terrain masking available until final descent." "Copy that, Viper 1. Adjusting approach as directed." Elena turned to Chun with the focused intensity of someone orchestrating life-and-death operations. "Rosa, I need you to contact base medical and ensure they're prepared for multiple trauma cases. 13 wounded, at least 3 critical." She nodded and immediately began making the necessary calls, her combat medic training allowing her to interface seamlessly with Elena's tactical coordination. The two veterans worked together with the smooth efficiency of people who understood that every second counted when American lives hung in the balance. Morrison stood transfixed, watching Elena command respect from pilots and ground forces with an authority that came from proven competence under fire. This was leadership at a level he had never experienced, decisions that affected the lives of dozens of people being made with calm precision while enemy fire continued to threaten American soldiers. Henley had gone completely silent, his earlier bravado replaced by something approaching reverence as he witnessed expertise that dwarfed anything in his own experience. The woman he had dismissed as a clueless dependent was coordinating a complex combat operation with casual competence that spoke of skills earned through years of the most demanding training imaginable. "Viper 1, this is Ghost 27. The pilot's voice carried urgent concern. "We've got movement in the northern sector, possible enemy reinforcements approaching convoy position. Request immediate tactical assessment." Elena's training kicked in as she processed the new threat, automatically calculating response times and weapon effectiveness based on target characteristics and friendly positions. Ghost 27. Confirm visual on approximately 20 personnel moving south along ridgeline bearing 0 degrees from Convoy location. Confirmed Viper 1. Infantry in open terrain, no visible heavy weapons, approximately 800 meters from friendly positions. Elena's voice carried the deadly calm of someone who had made similar decisions 47 times before. Ghost 27, you're cleared hot on infantry target. Recommend strafing run with 30mm, north to south approach vector to avoid friendly fire. Copy cleared hot. Beginning attack, run now. The sound of A-10 cannon fire echoed through Elena's phone speaker as the pilot executed her tactical guidance, with precision that would have been impossible without someone who understood both the terrain and the tactical situation better than anyone currently airborne. Direct hits on enemy infantry, came the confirmation. No visible survivors, threat neutralized. Elena allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction before immediately refocusing on the evacuation effort. The enemy forces had been systematically eliminated, but wounded soldiers still needed immediate medical attention that could mean the difference between life and death. Dustoff 7-2, you are cleared for landing at designated coordinates, Elena transmitted. All enemy positions neutralized. Friendly infrared strobes marking safe approach vector. Dr. Reeves watched the entire operation with complete incomprehension, trying to reconcile the quiet widow from her therapy group with the combat coordinator who was saving American lives through sheer force of expertise and determination. Elena's phone buzzed with final tactical updates as the evacuation birds touched down and began loading casualties under the protection of circling A-10s that she had guided to the target with surgical precision. Dustoff 7-2, mission complete, came the final transmission through Elena's phone. All casualties evacuated successfully. Ground Commander sends his personal thanks to Viper 1 for tactical coordination that saved American lives tonight. Elena felt the familiar mixture of relief and exhaustion that followed successful combat operations. The adrenaline of life-and-death decision-making slowly giving way to the knowledge that soldiers would be going home to their families because of actions taken in the last 30 minutes. She set her phone down with hands that trembled slightly from the aftermath of coordinating multiple aircraft under combat conditions. The community center felt surreal after serving as an impromptu operations center for a mission that had just saved 13 American lives. The silence stretched between them until Chun spoke first, her voice filled with the respect of one combat veteran addressing another. Elena, what you just did was extraordinary. Those soldiers owe their lives to your expertise. Elena looked around the circle at faces that now showed a mixture of awe, respect, and complete reappraisal of everything they thought they knew about her. Morrison's expression held something approaching worship, while Henley appeared to be struggling with the reality that he had been lecturing someone whose combat record dwarfed his own by orders of magnitude. Dr. Reeves cleared her throat nervously, tried to restore some semblance of normalcy to her therapy group. Elena, I have to ask, why didn't you tell us about your military service from the beginning? Elena considered the question carefully, her mind still processing the tactical success while trying to return to civilian mindset. Because I came here to grieve my husband, not to be treated like some kind of war hero, she said quietly. I wanted to be just another military widow working through loss. Henley finally found his voice, though it came out subdued and filled with something that might have been shame. Elena, I owe you an apology. What I said earlier, the assumptions I made, I was completely out of line. Elena looked at him with eyes that had seen more combat than most people could imagine, but her expression held no anger, only understanding. Marcus, you treated me the way a lot of people treat military spouses. The assumption that we're somehow separate from the military experience, that we don't understand what service really means. Morrison shook his head in amazement. But you're Viper 1. The pilot who saved Bravo Company. The canyon run that every A-10 pilot studies in training. That was you. Elena nodded simply, accepting the recognition without false modesty, but also without the pride that might have characterized someone seeking glory rather than simply doing their job. That was one mission out of 47. Every pilot in my squadron had similar stories, similar moments when training and luck combined to save American lives. Chun moved closer, her medic's instincts recognizing that Elena was still processing grief alongside the adrenaline of successful combat coordination. How do you deal with carrying that kind of responsibility? Rosa asked quietly, knowing that split-second decisions determine who lives and dies. Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering how to explain something that most people would never understand. You focus on the mission, she said finally, on the soldiers counting on you to bring them home. Everything else, the fear, the doubt, the weight of command that comes later. Dr. Reeves leaned forward with professional interest. And is that what brought you here tonight? Processing the weight of that responsibility? Elena nodded, feeling some of the exhaustion that had driven her to seek help in the first place. My husband understood that weight because he carried it too. When he died, I lost the one person who truly comprehended what those 47 missions meant. What cost to make decisions like the ones I just made. The room fell silent as they absorbed the reality that Elena's grief was more complex than simple loss, that she was mourning not just a husband, but a fellow warrior who had shared burdens that few people could understand. Chin spoke into the silence with the wisdom of someone who had seen combat from a different perspective but understood its psychological toll. Elena, what you did tonight coordinating that rescue, that wasn't just about tactical expertise. That was about refusing to let people die when you had the skills to save them. Elena smiled for the first time since entering the community center, expression that transformed her face from grief-stricken widow to someone who had found peace with her identity as both mourner and warrior. If you enjoyed this story of hidden courage and sacrifice, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite moment or character, or share if you've ever witnessed someone rise to meet impossible challenges when lives were on the line.